The Prime Minister has confirmed that the UK government will consider the case for the introduction of so-called vaccine passports. The document could take the form of a vaccine certificate or proof of COVID status, and the NHS mobile app could be modified to carry that information. But Mr Johnson was keen to emphasise the considerable difficulties involved, and it is an idea that he and other ministers have dismissed several times in the past. He said he was still confident that all restrictions in England could be lifted by June the 21st. In Scotland, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has unveiled what she called a deliberately cautious strategy with a phased reopening of the economy. More on Scotland in just a moment, but first our Deputy Political Editor Vicki Young on the debate at Westminster.
Up and down the country, every minute of the day.
OK, thank you.
People are getting some protection from the virus that's changed our lives.
3, 2, 1, shut, scratch.
This is our way out of COVID restrictions. If everything goes according to plan, this summer dance floors, theatres and concert venues could be packed once more. But should everyone be let through the doors, or only those who've been vaccinated? Ministers need to decide soon.
We're looking at a novelty for our country. We haven't had stuff like this before. We've never thought in terms of having something that you have to show to go to a pub or a theatre. And so there are deep and complex issues that we need to explore, ethical issues.
Not everyone is waiting for the government review. To protect vulnerable residents, some care homes are asking employees for proof they've had a vaccine.
With new staff that are joining us, we're just going to make it a requirement that they have to have the vaccine. And if they're not willing to, then they can't work for us.
It's not just the care sector taking this approach. Other companies want employees to be vaccinated too.
It's going to be the protection and safety of their staff and also protection and safety of their customers. So I feel it's a no-brainer, basically.
What about people who decide that they either can't have one for medical reasons or they don't want to have one? It's not compulsory in this country. Is that unfair on them?
The ones that don't want to have it, that's not unfair. That's their decision. That's their choice. But I think it's going to mean that they won't get a job. They won't be able to go to pubs, restaurants, theatres, or even travel. So that's their choice.
Ministers accept that other countries are likely to ask for vaccine passports before we can travel abroad. But some say using them at home is unfair.
It's really important that the government holds fast to the idea that vaccination is voluntary. It's a fundamental right that we should be able to choose what medical treatment we have or we don't have. And inevitably, those people who would be most disadvantaged by any system would be those people who are already marginalised, already poorer, or already disadvantaged in other ways.
For weeks, the government's ruled out a vaccine passport or certificate for domestic use. But that's now changed. There's going to be a review and ministers say they're going into it with an open mind. One idea being looked at is to use the existing NHS app so people can record whether they've been vaccinated or had a negative test before they enter a venue. The government knows that vaccinations and testing are the key to opening up many businesses, but they need to avoid a divisive two-tier system. Vicki Young, BBC News, Westminster.
And our home editor, Mark Easton, is with me, listening carefully to the Prime Minister there. Mark, he didn't sound at all certain as to whether he wanted it or not.
I think you could hear the equivocation in his voice when talking about a vaccination passport. Conservative ministers are generally pretty queasy about the idea of identification papers. You'll remember 20 years ago, the row over ID cards, which were portrayed as un-British. But there is, I think, a certain inevitability about some kind of vaccine passport, and that's why the government is looking at whether the NHS app, the one we use to check our medical records and test results, whether that could be adapted securely to show both vaccination status and, as Vicki was saying, COVID status. And the thought is that if you can show either that you've had a jab or that you've recently tested negative, that actually gets round the discrimination problem of people who cannot or prefer not to have the vaccine. But there's a lot more work to be done. There are technical questions about how you make sure that confidential medical data is safe and secure, and practical questions about how you make sure ensure that the passport is available to all and acceptable by all, not just nationally, but internationally. We know that major airlines are already saying they're going to demand a vaccine certificate to fly to certain places, and countries like Greece are encouraging the EU to introduce a vaccine certificate for tourists to go on holiday this summer. So some politicians may not like the idea of having state papers required to go to the pub or the football or the theatre. But this may just be another example of how the pandemic is forcing society really to adapt to new and often uncomfortable ways.
Mark, many thanks again. Mark Easton there, our Home Editor.